trigger.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be talking about a very cool optic that I have right here, and as you can probably tell by the title of the video, I am quite happy with it. This is the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2 1:8, so it's a 1:8 by 24 30mm tube, all that sort of good stuff. But today we're going to be going through all the particulars, why I think it's a great scope, not only in general, but also for the money. It comes in at a fairly aggressive price point, not the cheapest scope on the market, not the most expensive scope, but I think it fills a lot of roles and does a lot of them very, very well. But before we get into it, I really appreciate if you guys would like, share, subscribe, all that sort of good stuff. And also, if you look at the links in the description, I do have a subscribe star account that I recently opened up, and I'm going to be doing monthly giveaways over there. So basically, for the first few months, it's really only going to be like 5 to 10 people. So pretty much, if you're in there, you're pretty much guaranteed to get something in a giveaway. So basically, you're going to get more out of it than you put into it, especially for the first few months. But let's go ahead and talk about this optic right here. So as I mentioned, Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2. Now, something that I should mention is that I have not had a chance to play around with the Gen 1s at all. So I know some people complain that the reticle on the Gen 1 was too simple, or that the illumination was not good enough. And basically there was also no included throw lever on the Gen 1, which is a huge improvement on the Gen 2, which we will go over, of course. So we're going to be talking about the Gen 2 strictly compared to the Gen 2 because I haven't tried the Gen 1. Something else I should mention is that I do also have the 1:6, but also in the Gen 2 variation, which we'll be doing at a separate point in time because it is actually a fairly different optic and there are pros and cons to both, though the 1:8 is my favorite, so I made this video first. Now, right up front, I bought this with my own money. I brought it from Palmetto State Armory. I actually got it on a deal pretty much once they came out with the Gen 2, so I've had it for like 3 months at this point, I want to say. But I got it for this with the cantilever mount, not this one in particular, but I got it for $330 with a coupon code. So a very, very good price with free shipping from Palmetto State Armory. Then what I did is I took that cantilever mount that it came with, and I sold that for 70 bucks and put on one of my 30mm mounts that I had laying around. And so all in all, I paid under $300 for this optic. Now, it's a 1:8 with a lifetime warranty, 30mm tube, 24mm objective lens. It has cap turrets. It has illuminated reticle, and the reticle on it, we'll get into that later, is very, very good. And the brightness is also fairly good as well. So in the 3 months or so that I've had this optic, it has been exclusively on my ACR. So this one specifically is my latest build. It's just a 16.5-inch fairly standard setup, but it's also been on a DMR variation, which you would have seen in the intro when we stretched it out to 550 yards. More on that later. And then it's also been on a 300 blackout. It's been on a 14 5-pin and welded setup. So it's been on 3 different ACRs, over about 800 to 1,000 rounds on this specific optic, plus the 1:6 as well, which I have not as much rounds on, but a few hundred rounds on that as well. So in terms of total round count, I'm probably a little bit over 1,000 rounds, over about a half dozen or so different outings and multiple drop tests on this guy, and I am very impressed with its ability to hold zero under normal conditions, which is pretty much just running, gutting, shooting, that sort of thing, but also after drop test. So in terms of durability and longevity, I would say this is on par with almost any other optic in the mid-range, especially for LPVOs, and probably some higher end optics as well. But now let's go ahead and talk about something that apparently they fixed on the Gen 2, which is the glass quality. Reading online, a lot of people say that the Gen 1 glass quality is not that great, especially for, you know, a few $100 that you're paying for to $300 or $400 when they first came out. But happy to report that the glass quality on here is fairly exceptional in my opinion. The edge-to-edge clarity is very good. There's almost no tint to the glass whatsoever. Even when you're racked all the way up to 8x on this guy, generally speaking, when you go to really high magnification ranges like 1 to 10, 1 to 8, 1 to 6, those sorts of things, you tend to get some glass degradation when you go into the higher magnification range. That is definitely here on the 1 to 8, and so you will notice a little more haze and a little more fuzz on 8x just because that is a large magnification range on any scope. But it's still clear enough to make easy shots out to 700 yards and beyond. The farthest that we took this optic out was 550 yards with the DMR setup. I was using 75 grain PPU match, so not even that great of ammunition, but it worked fairly well. It's about 1 MOA ammunition, if not a little bit more than that. But we were able to stretch it out to 550 yards. Now, combined with what I would consider decent glass quality or very good glass quality, it really only gets let down a little bit at 8x, where there is some degradation in glass quality, but overall it's very, very good. Now, let's talk about that in conjunction with the reticle. I'll put a picture of the reticle on screen, but basically it's a ballistic drop compensated reticle for 5.56. So basically I have it zeroed at 50, so it's a 50-100 zero. Now, of course, that depends on your barrel length, your ammo type, all that sort of different stuff. But basically you zero it at 50, and then you should be able to use the hash marks depending on your barrel length, ammunition choice, at longer range. Now, I will say that we had an extreme amount of luck in this, but with the 75 grain PPU match and the ACR DMR barrel setup, we were able to make first round impacts at a 2/3 reduced target, so it's 12 by 20 at 550 yards. 550 yards is about the farthest that I'll ever shoot around this area, and it's the farthest I've ever shot. I've shot that fairly consistently. But at 550 yards with no setup, no test shots, nothing, we were able to make first round impacts on a 2/3 reduced size target at 550 yards just using the drop compensator on the reticle.
Nice shot. Nice, 3 in a row, one more.
That makes me happy. But one thing that's very nice about this is inside of 200 yards, there's basically no compensation. So you're just using the center dot, which is a center 1 MOA dot, I want to say. So it's not crazy precise, but it's more meant to be used up close. And then when you're further away, you're using the very fine hashes on the BDC. But that being said, the throw from 1 to 8, it's a 180-degree throw, so it's fairly short, it's fairly standard, I should say. But with the included throw lever, it really does help it out. That being said, it's also smooth, so it's not like it's the most needed thing in the world, because you can still change it fairly easily without using the throw lever. One thing to note on here is I did have these start to roll out on me, so what I did is I just blue Loctited them in, and I haven't had it shift at all. So basically I threw some Loctite in there, torqued it down as much as I can get with just my fingers, and it's been good to go. I haven't had it come loose or break off or anything like that. So the BDC, the glass quality is certainly there, very easy to use from 0 to 600 yards, 0 to 700 yards probably if you were really good. Now for most people, me included, 600, 700 yards is really pushing it with 5.56. And so with the ACR DMR barrel, which is an 18.5-inch heavy barrel, 550 yards really wasn't that difficult. We were able to hit probably 70% of the time when we were really doing our job, and we're not very good shooters. But you could probably, if you're in the hands of a better shooter with better ammunition, that sort of thing, you could definitely stretch it out to 700-800 yards and probably further with this optic. Now, something on here that carried over from the Gen 1 is, of course, the capped turrets. Now, I am a fan of capped turrets on pretty much everything that uses a reticle, because if they're using the reticle for their drop calculations, then you don't really need to be adjusting dials. Now on more precision rifles with higher magnification scopes, dials are always really nice. It's generally speaking faster to dial and just use that center dot depending on what your reticle is. What I like to do on here is, of course, because they're capped, you set it and then you forget about it. And of course, because they're capped, they're protected, so they shouldn't shift at all. Something to note here on the windage knob, however, is that it has an extra compartment in the top of it for another battery. So basically you have 2 batteries on you at all times if your light goes off. Now I want to say that the battery life at max brightness, which is 11, this goes from 0 to 11. Now there are no hash marks in between, so if you're at a medium setting like 7 or 8, you always have to dial back to 0 to turn it off. That being said, you can just dial 1 back to 11, and at 11 it is what I would consider, personally I consider it daylight bright. You can see it, it's very like tinted orange, so it allows it to pop up a lot better than just the black reticle. Now something about the 1 to 8 is that the reticle inside is actually 30% larger than the 1 to 6. Because at 1 to 6, of course, it's a lower magnification range, so the reticle must be smaller to compensate for the magnification difference at range. So the 1 to 8 is actually much easier to use up close, though the trade-off is you don't get quite as wide of a field of view. Now, field of view, talking about that for a second, is a little bit over 100 feet, I want to say. which anything over 100 is really good. Now, some people will chase numbers and they'll say, oh, well, it's not 110 or it's not 112 or something like that. The 1 to 6, I believe, has 116 feet of field of view, but unfortunately, the 1 to 6 is actually a little more warped around the edges than the 1 to 8. So the 1 to 8 is almost like a 1.1 or a 1.2, but it's a very, very flat image at 1x. So everything outside of like 3 yards away is very flat and there's very little warping around the edges. So using this in close range in conjunction with having the optic on 11, which is generally what I set it to when I'm outside. If I'm doing low light shooting or at dusk, which you'll see a lot in the intro, then I'll have it on like 6 or 7 because honestly it gets a little bright and it starts blooming out. Indoors, 11 is definitely too bright, but if you're outside in direct sunlight, you're going to be wanting to put it on 11, which I think it's going to last for like 20 hours, maybe 25 hours if you're lucky, which doesn't seem like that long because it's not that long, but of course the technology that they use for these is a little different than like your LEDs and your red dots and stuff like that. So even though the reticle isn't insanely bright in daylight, the fact that it does pop up and it does pull out orange, which obviously makes it a lot faster than just using the black dot of the reticle, and you have that half horseshoe on top, which really draws your eye to the center. So you can use that horseshoe to put over your target, and of course that dot's going to be in the center of that. So it's very, very easy to aim up close, in my opinion. On 1x, it's very fast to run and gun. You can do really quick transitions, and you're not going to be fighting the optic to be able to see what you want to see. On a lot of other LPVOs, especially cheaper ones, like for instance, we have a bunch of UTG 1 to 8s. I actually have 3 of these over here, which at this point have thousands and thousands of rounds through them in both 5.56 and 308, 6 drop tests on all of these guys, and they've done really, really well. The problem is on 1x, you actually have a lot of blurring around the edges and it's very warped, which means that up close that can be very jarring, so it's difficult to see what you're actually trying to aim. So during target transitions, that can be very difficult. With the 1 to 8 Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2, which is kind of a mouthful, you don't have that issue quite as much. So anything past like 3 yards is very flat and very easy to transition, and you don't necessarily get lost in the optic and you're not trying to fight it to find what you're looking for. Basically, I'm saying that I personally find it very easy and intuitive to point and shoot with this optic on 1x, especially compared to some cheaper or other low power variable zoom optics. One other kind of neat feature that I want to mention real fast is that they actually have the up down and the left right marked on the optic body itself, so it's stenciled on there, or however they put that on there. But basically, when you're looking down here and if you need to adjust, you can see which direction you need to turn it without having to look at the top or the side of your optic. So the fact that they have that printed on the optic body itself, I really like that. So I mentioned it a few times, so let's go ahead and talk about the drop test. So I'm gonna go ahead and show it on screen, but basically what it is you take your gun, in this case the ACR, and put it into a Caldwell, in this case what I have is a one of their Caldwell shooting turrets, which is basically a very small tripod that kind of locks your gun down. It makes it very easy to take precise shots, even if you don't have the greatest trigger in the world, which in this case is just a fairly heavy mil-spec trigger. It's smooth, but it's still fairly heavy. You put a target at either 50 or 100 yards, in this case 100 yards. And in this case, I also did a 5-round group. The ammunition that I was using was Hornady M193, so fairly hot ammunition, not the most accurate ammunition in the world. I did a 5-shot group at 100 yards. You can see it's hitting a little high, maybe a little to the right, just because, you know, 50 yards zero is going to throw it a little high at 100. And then you did a double drop test. So basically what you do is you drop one on the top and one on the side of the optic and see how much it shifts. And at 100 yards, I got what appeared to be about a half MOA to 1 MOA shift at 100 yards. Now, in my opinion, that's pretty much nothing and is honestly inside of the margin of error for me as a shooter, especially considering that the center dot on the optic is 1 MOA. So if I had a slightly different point of aim for that next 5-round group, that could throw my group average off just a little bit. And of course, you know, the barrel had heated up a little bit at that point, and then it got a chance to cool down again. So there's a lot of different things going on there. So basically, if it's within an inch at 100 yards, it's basically negligible. And in this case, it was vertical of about a ½ inch to an inch, somewhere in that range. So basically no movement whatsoever. And even if you were taking shots out to 500-600 yards, it wouldn't even throw you off target. So I would say that there's a lot of other factors that go into that, but I would say that the drop test was essentially no shift in zero, or no important shift in zero, which is what you're really looking for. And of course the optic didn't break at all. The glass is still in perfect quality. It has a few nicks and scratches on the outside, but that's just basic wear and tear in my opinion. Now, if you did manage to break one or to lose one or a few other things, Vortex has an exceptional warranty and will send you a new one. All you need to do is find the pieces, mail them back, and they will send you a new one. So in the case of something bad ever happening to this, you can get a new one very easy, which especially for, you know, $300 to $400, it's not no money, but it's also not a huge amount of money. It is nice to know that investment will essentially last forever, since they will send you a new one if it breaks. So we've talked about a lot of things that I like about the optic, but there are of course a few things that are not my favorite. One of those things being that it's not the smallest optic in the world, so it is a 1:8, so it's about 10 inches long, 3 inches wide at the turrets. It's 18 ounces, 18.1 ounces, I want to say by itself. I could be off a little bit on that. So plus the mount that we have on here, we're about 24 ounces, which is 1.5 pounds. So if you're looking for the ultimate lightweight build that can also be super versatile and do it all, you're gonna have to spend a lot more money to get a lighter, more durable optic, which they are out there, like the Trijicon 1:8s and some of the other optics that are out there are very, very high quality and also very, very lightweight. This just isn't one of those optics. So if you already have a fairly heavy rifle like the ACR, which comes in at like 8 pounds naked, and you add 1.5 pounds to the top plus any other accessories, now you have a greater than 10 pound 5.56 carbine, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Also, something that I do want to mention is that LPVOs are great for target shooting. They're really fun to use. They allow the user to basically do up close target shooting and long range target shooting if they so desire. And this optic in particular excels at that because, as I mentioned, at 1x you do have a quote unquote daylight bright reticle, which does work in the daylight. It's not super bright, but it does work in the daylight. And you also have that 8x magnification with a really good reticle that allows you to range out pretty much as far as you want, though of course you're running out of room with the 5.56 fairly quick. So now let's talk about a few competitive options that you can get that in some cases make more sense than the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2, especially the 1:8 version. So most people don't really need an LPVO. As I mentioned, they're very fun, they're great for target shooting, they're not quite as good for run and gun, and of course for home defense it's pretty much a no, I would say, just because especially if you're inside that really close range, you're not going to be able to pick up that reticle very well. You can of course do it, and inside of really close ranges you can of course just point and shoot, but for a lot of people, especially for serious applications, one of the best optics for under $400 is the EOTech 512. Now this one here has a fairly crappy paint job on it, but I bought it this way. I actually bought this guy used for $300, and for $300 the EOTech 512 is a very, very tanky optic. So it's basically unbreakable. It has a 10-year warranty from EOTech. It has a much better battery life of 1,000 hours. It is 100% daylight bright, and you can actually turn it down in full daylight because sometimes it'll still bloom out a little bit too much. So basically, for a duty optic, EOTech 512 for under $400. If you look around, you can buy them brand new. I want to say eBay and maybe Botac had them on for like $370 brand new, and you can find them used if you look at Arms List or Gunbroker, something like that, for under $400. I have two of them. I paid $200 something for one and $300 for this one, which of course are really good deals. So for a lot of people, they don't need LPVOs, but they want them because they're fun and they are incredibly versatile, but being incredibly versatile doesn't mean they're the best for every application. So inside of 50 yards, a EOTech is going to be much, much faster. So if it's for a home defense, for a truck gun or something like that, a 1:8 is much heavier, it's much more bulky, it's much more complicated, it's not as tanky, still durable optic, but not as tanky as an EOTech. It's much heavier, so there are a lot of drawbacks to it. So now, as I kind of mentioned, this really only applies to more serious application guns like home defense, dedicated home defense, dedicated truck gun, that sorts of thing, where the EOTech is going to be a really good option. Whereas the Vortex 1:8 might be more versatile overall, but it's not as good for those specific applications, especially when self-defense pretty much 100% of the time is going to take place inside of 50 yards and more than that inside of 25 yards. So EOTech 512 is an excellent alternative for the under the $400 price tag if you do a little bit of looking, and you can find them for $300 around that range if you try really hard. Now, another competitive option or a competitive series of scopes is the Bushnell. Their AR optics, they have the 1:6 and the 1:8, and I want to say they range from like $270 to like $350, somewhere in that price point, and they do come with integrated throw levers, and from what I've heard, they're fairly good. Some people say that they're better than the Vortex, some people say that they're on par, but I don't have any of them on hand right now, but I will probably be testing one in the future, or several of them in the future. And in terms of lower priced optics, the only ones that I recommend right now in the same price point are in a lower price point, so of under $200, are the UTG 1:8, specifically the BG4 reticle. The circle dot reticle, the mill dot reticle, all those are nowhere near as good as the BG4 reticle, which I've taken out to 400 yards, and again, lines up perfectly. So for 5.56, that's the one to go. That's the way to go, and you also get the 1:8 capabilities. Though on 1X, it's fairly warped around the edges, and on 8X you have like a 30% reduction in glass quality. Though it should still be mentioned that I have taken these optics out to 400, 500 yards, no problem. So in the end, the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2 1:8, I believe, is an excellent value. It is a very, very good optic, even in the mid-range price point. It offers a lot more than a lot of the budget optics. It offers better glass quality, it offers better reticle, it offers a slimmer design, in some cases more durable, better warranty for sure. So you do get a lot with this package. That being said though, like any jack of all trades, like a 1:8 or a 1:6, it's not the best at everything. So there are optics that are better than it at certain applications, but a 1:8, especially the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2, which is a mouthful, like I said before, is a very, very good choice for a gun, a general purpose gun that literally can do just about everything. So just keep in mind that the Vortex Strike Eagle Gen 2 is a jack of all trades, and in my opinion, a very, very good one. But being a jack of all trades, it is a master of none. That being said though, it can only ever be as good as the person shooting it. So for an all-purpose gun, it is a recommend for me for the under $400 price tag. I think that it is a lot of scope for the money. So that's pretty much it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think of these scopes down below, or if there are any other budget options that you like in this sort of probably $250 to $400 price range, you know, and I probably will check them out at some point in the future. Like I mentioned in the intro, there are some links down in the description if you feel like supporting the channel in any way. It's always appreciated. So once again, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.
Hey you. Yeah, you. What are you still doing here? The video's over. Wait. Why are you still here? Like, share, and subscribe. Or don't. The choice is yours. But if you do subscribe, thanks. And I like pizza. Peace off.
Hit. Dude, that last one felt just as good. I aimed in the exact same spot.